So I'll start again. Let me. Okay, now we are recording again. Cool. So good morning, everybody. I am sitting in Cape Town, South Africa, and my name is George Gabriel, and I'll be the main presenter this evening, talking about smart villages and CityZEN. Along with me, I have Robyn, and Robyn and I only recently met, but we had that kind of meeting where you realize that you're completely on the same page and on the same wavelength. And a lot of that has to do with Robyn's experience and background, which is in many ways similar to mine. I'll let her explain. And what really draws me to Robyn and why she's involved in this work is because of her knowledge of what's wrong, but her incredible enthusiasm for fixing and making things right. So Robyn, I'd like you to take a minute, introduce yourself so the audience knows who you are.
A full minute. Thank you, George. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I am honored to be part of this discussion, this conversation. I've been in the world of development and nation building for a couple of years. And the one thing that resonated with me with regards to CityZEN is that we've for so long outsourced our power as citizens to the abstract narrative of politicians and the business sector. And the one thing that CityZEN does do is bring back our almost responsibility as citizens, as households. You'll hear more about the mechanics of the platform, but also it's just a fresh start for everybody around the world, really. After COVID, I mean, George very well says it, that COVID was day zero for us around the globe. And we really had to reset, rethink, recalibrate, and now we're rebuilding, and we've got to think differently as people, as business people, but we also have to think differently as families going forward and households. So I'm very excited to hear more insights from the rest of the floor. But yes, so development has been my profession. I am currently the creative executive for Joy. Joy was birthed also during the process of lockdown because everybody's just going through so much. We needed to kind of get something or conversation around how do we restore our mental health, spiritual health, and just our humanity during this dispensation. Right now, I think we're all gearing up to really work differently and appreciate humanity a little bit differently as well, regardless of what we're being fed by the media or what are the real stories on the ground. I think it's a good context for us to go forward. So thank you for having me, George. I look forward to this next couple of minutes.
Great. Thank you very much. Wonderful introduction. Okay, and then a little bit about myself. You'll hear my accent, which is American, although I haven't lived in the States for basically half my life. I lived and grew up in the New York area, went to school and studied social anthropology, which is quite relevant to this discussion. My description of a social anthropologist is someone who looks at humanity, people's past and present, and primarily what our task is to look at patterns and understand patterns and how those patterns have informed our development and can inform our future. In terms of, and then after the US, I lived in Norway for 15 years, which also informs this work quite a bit. The experience of living in a successful social democracy, and one that does a great job of caring for its people and for its environment, not without its problems, but still a very good example, and that comes up in the presentation. And then I moved to Cape Town 10 years ago, approximately 10 years ago, and have been here and working within the innovation and tech space, but also with social innovation as well, youth development, those types of issues. And 3 years ago, found myself getting involved in the Cape Town water crisis. And that basically is the start of a 3-year journey that ends up with CityZEN as the work. So let me jump right into the presentation. Give me 1 second here. There we go. Okay. Let me make sure that everybody can see. Robin, can you see the screen?
Yes, I can, clearly. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I'm not, because of the time limitation of what we have for today, I'm not going to go too much into the background of how this all was developed, but I'm more than willing to take that as questions as we move along. But what I want to do is just jump into the solution, what we've developed over these last 3 years, and how it can be used in really rethinking the way that cities function, but primarily from the point of view of how we can enable individuals to achieve their personal goals as the foundation. Okay, so what you see here is an image from 3 years ago this month, the photo on the right, but it's related to, and for those of you who don't know, depending on where you're tuning in from, 3 years ago, the city of Cape Town was experiencing a severe drought. And it was so severe that a term was created called Day Zero. And Day Zero was a potential moment, a day when the city of Cape Town would have to turn off the taps or turn off the ability to allow water to flow directly to people's homes and to businesses. And the reason for this is because the dam levels were obviously decreasing through the drought, and usage was not. So there was a need to think about and quickly act on how to get the people in the region to change their behavior. So what started was a campaign around this idea of Day Zero, and it was, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it and what went right and what went wrong, but clearly the one thing that definitely went right was that we ended up not having a Day Zero event. The water did not get turned off to everybody's taps, and that makes a huge difference. The way I like to describe that was that if you end up in a city like Cape Town turning off the water to people's homes and businesses, you basically create the largest refugee camp in the world. And what I mean by that is the result would be that everybody would have to stand in line and get their and access water in that way. And that would disrupt the way the city functioned completely. So what happened was that the city created regulations around how much water could be used, and then using, as you see in the bottom left corner, this idea of 50 liters a day. And then very, very importantly, and this all relates to the concept of smart villages, is that in order for people to function well in a complicated situation, we need to make the messaging and the goals very, very simple. So a way of doing that is to not only say, okay, you're limited to 50 liters of water a day, but in addition, this is what 50 liters of water a day looks like. This is how long, this is how much water you use if you take a shower. This is how much water you use when you flush your toilet, if you wash your dishes, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason for this is it takes, again, something that's complicated and it makes it something that everybody can get their heads around. And so the goal, obviously, through this entire period of 2017, 2018, and into 2019 was to nudge people's behavior in a way that we could control the one thing we knew, which was we could use less water. We could save water because we didn't know how to make water rain from the skies, and creating building desalination plants, and that type of other opportunities are very, very expensive. So my involvement was that I approached the Hospitality Association. As you see there, the photo, it says FedHasa, and I recommended that they take a leadership role in creating a water strategy and a pledge, because in my opinion, if the tourism industry were to experience a day zero event, it would take it years to recover from that. And again, I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but let's just the concept behind it was, as an industry sector where water is so critically important and also has such a prominent role in a city like Cape Town, which is considered one of the top tourist destinations in the world, then what we're aiming for here is using the business network as a way of informing people of what to do. So the pledge was an 8-point document that that basically GMs, general managers, and operations managers from leading hotels and many other members of the association signed at an event in October 2017. And you can see, the signatures there as a symbolic gesture, but they actually also signed the actual document. And what it included was very logical things. You needed to educate your customers, your guests. You needed to change your operating procedures. You needed to educate and train your staff. You needed to look at ways to save water. And one of the big issues was, and you needed to monitor your water usage differently. And now all of this, to those of you listening, might not sound particularly interesting, but follow me, allow me to walk this through to its conclusion, because at the end of the day, what this is all about is data analytics. It's a term that's being used quite a bit these days, and rightly so, because at the end of the day, all of us, whoever we are, we have a budget that we're dealing with. So in the case of the water crisis, we had a budget of how much water we normally use on, let's say, a monthly basis. And let's say you're a hotel and you use your water and you pay your monthly bill. That seems completely fine. But then when the parameters change, right? You have a budget, but then the parameters change. Things outside your control change. And this happens all the time in our lives. We might get sick. There might be an economic downturn. There might be a lockdown. And these types of things happen, and they're not within our control, but we still have to respond to them. And it's up to a municipality, regional, provincial government, national government to try and educate people and nudge their behavior so that they take those new parameters into account. And of course, today, when we look at the big issues that are playing out worldwide, such as climate change, again, not getting into the politics of that, but let's just say that the temperatures are rising. And let's just say that potentially Cape Town, which, by the way, is now at 100% dam levels, which is absolutely amazing and wonderful, and usage, behavior, the amount of water people are using still remains low, lower than it used to be, is fantastic. So a behavior change has occurred in not only individual homes, businesses, and large scale businesses. And so let me just go back. There was a question that was asked at that event, which is very relevant to this discussion. And that question that was asked was, how many of you in the room running your hotels are monitoring your water usage on a daily basis? And only a few hands went up, which was logical because their budget allowed for their water usage. They were used to it. They never really thought about it. It was simply an expense, but then the parameters change. And I can promise you that if you were to ask those operations managers and GMs today, I'm sure that all of them are monitoring it on a daily basis, and they're using technology to do so. And I'm pretty sure they would also all tell you that they're all saving money on their natural resources that they're using, because they're far more conscious of how they're using water. And so if I can just paint a very simple picture for you, there's a problem, and the problem is there's a drought. And then government, obviously, and other players within the field, NGOs, the media, et cetera, all have a role to play in informing the municipality that we have to now, as individuals and businesses, change our behavior. So then they create this messaging. And then in addition to the messaging, what you want to do is create a very clear picture as to, well, how are we doing on a daily basis? And how are we doing, in this case, it was a weekly basis. So you could go in, and I can pull it up for you, which is, there was a dashboard that was created. Let me do that right now, actually. 1 second. There we go. There's the dashboard. So this dashboard, which by the way isn't being kept up to date anymore, so it's no longer accurate, and they stopped updating it back in March, just as lockdown started. But there's another website that shows this in greater detail. But I'm not getting into this. The whole point of this is not about the water crisis. The whole point is that if you can simplify the message to this extent, where here's the target, and this again was what we were trying as a city to achieve on a daily average, and this was the actual. So then we knew that as a collective we weren't achieving our target, but the dam levels were going up. But as we can see here, the weekly trend was that the percentages were going down. And so the point of a smart village, and where you'll see we're going to go with CityZEN, is to say, how do you simplify the message, get everybody to understand what their role is, and then, when possible, sorry, there we go. Make a pledge of commitment that says, I'm going to be part of the solution, and this is how I'm going to be part of the solution. And that, and then of course, there's another key element to this. And this is where CityZEN, what CityZEN is all about, which is the next thing that then happens logically is that then there's a marketplace solution. In other words, as a hotel or a private home decides that they're going to start to save water, they might need help to do so. They might not know what to do. So they might need to hire, obviously, a plumber to look for a leak. They might need to put in an installation, as many homes did. They dug boreholes so that they could tap into the water that was underground. They invested in tanks to capture the rainwater that was coming off of everybody's rooftops. And all of this was economic activity that helps solve the crisis, but also creates economic opportunity. And that is an incredibly important part of how a smart village will function, is that you're going to have this continuum between what's the problem, what are different ways of solving it, how do I pledge to be a part of it, what does the marketplace have to offer, and then with the dashboard, as I just showed you, how are we doing, what's our current status. And so that's basically the background for CityZEN. And it was born out of, sorry, there we go. It was born out of many months of research with a team that had, first, there were a series of workshops that we ran connecting the tech and innovation community in Cape Town together with city, civil society, Western Cape Province, and academia. So basically, what we tried to do was to involve as many different aspects of society in these conversations around how are we going to solve this problem together, especially what we were pushing for was, what happens if day zero actually occurs? Because that's really the crisis. Everybody saving water, that's a behavioral change issue, but actually turning off the taps, that would have been serious. And so we needed to be prepared for that. So we were running these workshops, there were hundreds of people involved. And one of the things that I was astounded by was how many people gave of their time and energy regardless of their position in society. And I mean, there were businesses involved, and in Cape Town, for those of you who know, we have an incredible array of tech businesses, from some wonderful tiny little startup businesses that you've never heard, to Amazon Web Services, one of the, basically the largest provider of website infrastructure in the world. So, and they were all involved in these conversations and discussions. And so what we did was we took all of that information and we summarized it, and I basically handed it to a task team. And that task team was composed of people with a different varied set of skills. And so there were behavioral economists involved, there were UX UI designers, there were campaign managers who had expertise in dealing with sustainability related issues. And then we had guests who were involved in the process. And we spent weekly for 4 or 5 months building what you're about to see. So here's what it is. CityZEN is an incentives-based rewards program for municipalities. So first of all, incentives-based rewards program, many of you listening will know what a rewards program is because you're probably part of one, if not 10, not necessarily always by choice, but your bank probably has a rewards program, airlines that you fly have a rewards program. Rewards programs, lots of retail shops, whether they're, food stores. In a South African context, you have, for example, Pick and Pay Smart Shopper. Your insurance companies these days also have rewards programs. The best known in South Africa is Discovery Vitality, which is a very, very active and successful incentives-based rewards program. And all of them have two purposes. One is to basically keep you as a customer and keep you happy. And the second is to get information out of you, because with that information, they can then service you better. And so the concept behind CityZEN is, well, how about if municipalities had that same thinking, and what would that look like? So the second component is that it supports an active, engaged citizenry. And that's critical because government, and especially a government in a place, again, I'll use Cape Town as an example, but any place in the world, government can't rely only on itself. It needs civic engagement. From the highest levels of government, in terms of giving input on new laws and changes in structure within the government, but down to the tiniest elements. Let's imagine it's the drought is occurring. What the city needs is that there are citizens who walk down the street, notice that there's a leak, from some, underground pipe, and that they report it, because government can't be every place at all times. So it needs citizens to be willing to make that reporting happen. And in the case of Cape Town, as of today, I think there are 5 or 6 ways in which you can report a leak. I'm going to use this one as a particular example. Again, just using the drought and the water crisis as a metaphor for the whole platform. But so basically, what you need is somebody who's willing to go and see if there's a leak and then report it. So currently there are 5 ways, or maybe 6 ways of reporting to the city of Cape Town if you find a leak. Of those, I think 2 give you a reference number, and none of them actually tell you if it's actually been fixed. So in terms of service delivery, it's certainly not the same as one today would expect from an on-demand platform, and that's the next step here, such as an Uber. Uber would not function at all if it wasn't able to tell you in real time how far your driver is from picking you up. So the next level is we need to create an on-demand service delivery platform. And an on-demand service delivery platform, again, as an example, is something like an Uber or an Amazon or an Airbnb. These are the big players, but there are lots of small ones as well. Locally here, the one that's quite well known is called Sweep South, and it's a way of accessing someone to come and clean your home or clean your office when you need it. And so an on-demand service delivery platform is just a very different mindset as to how to go about delivering service. And obviously we all want to live in a productive and sustainable city. So that's the breakdown of what this is about. Okay, so here we go. CityZEN is building the world's first citizen services marketplace. And that's a phrase that we came up with, that enables residents and property owners, households, And let me explain the logic behind that, which is if you think about a municipality or a city, whatever size you want of government, the smallest unit is the household.
Mm.
And so if we can get the household to act and behave correctly
Mm-hmm.
in the way that is in everyone's best interest, their own best interest and the municipality's best interest, and we can reach them at that level, then we're going to end up with a municipality that's simply much easier to manage. But then we have to change our mindset and really think about how can a municipality best help a household. And so one of the ways I've been thinking about this of late is thinking of a homeowner as, and I understand there are many people within, you know, a city who don't own a home, but if we just start with that as the basis for it, the homeowner is actually an investor. You know, they've invested in an area, and so really the task of the municipality is to service them so that their property is at least stays, you know, stays in value or increases in value. And the reason for that is because of all the issues that a municipality would be, you know, connected to: safety, security, education, obviously delivery of the basic services such as electricity, water, etc. So the marketplace enables the households to efficiently transact and interact with their local municipality, businesses, and community. And we've chosen that phrase, efficiently transact and interact, because this isn't a political platform. This is not what your feelings or opinions or thoughts are on changing in policy. This is about the day-to-day delivery of service, of which I would think, you know, and again, I don't have direct experience working in government, but it seems to me that a lot of the purpose of government is to deliver services. And so by focusing primarily on that, and not only towards the municipality, but also to its local businesses and your local community. And what I mean by that is, you know, accessing plumbers or being part of your neighborhood watch or other, you know, civil society organizations. All of that can now take place on one integrated platform. And finally, the way we do it is by using inclusive design, behavioral science, and data analytics to make the experience seamless, engaging, and rewarding. Now, let me just, again, pick these phrases apart for those of you who aren't familiar, but even still, it's worth taking a few seconds to understand the background to this. So inclusive design is not only good design in terms of the fact that, you know, like your smartphone, it's easy to use, it's pretty to look at, it's logical, it's what they call intuitive, but it's also inclusive, meaning that it also it understands that different people within a society relate to information in different ways. And so you have to build the design capabilities in such a way that, again, I'll use a Cape Townian or South African you know, big issue or theme, which is, you know, it's different for a homeowner in a wealthier area of the city, you know, and their phone usage and what their phone provides them and their data provides them is very different than, say, their domestic worker who might not have the same kind of phone or access to data, et cetera, but they both need to be able to access the same system. So that's what inclusive design is it takes that into consideration. Then behavioral science is what has become so important of the last 10, 15 years, is understanding how we can successfully and in a positive way affect people's behavior. This is a major issue on all of the social media platforms. It's the foundation of advertising. And what we know is that you can affect people's behavior by the way that you incentivize them to do things. And so we take that very heavily into consideration in terms of how the system is going to work, because our goal is to help people achieve what they want to achieve. And then data analytics, the simplest breakdown of that is what I was, excuse me, getting into before around the dashboard. The data analytics at the end of the day, simply put, is there are things that are happening, there are numbers, we know those numbers, and how do we work with those numbers to make them meaningful for us? So again, dam levels, unemployment levels, homelessness, even traffic as an issue. These are all things, all themes and important issues in a society that can be broken down into numbers. And knowing what those numbers are, and primarily, how are we doing in relation to those numbers? Are they going up? Are they going down? It makes a big difference in terms of being able to make good decisions. And obviously, we want an experience that is seamless, engaging, and rewarding, because that keeps people coming back. And loyalty is a big part of any society, you know. So to finish off, I just want to point out that if you removed CityZEN from the top and stuck in, for example, Airbnb, you'd realize that we're using the same thinking, which is Airbnb. What is Airbnb? For those of you who haven't used it, you've probably heard of it. Obviously, most of you have at least heard of it. Airbnb is just a marketplace between people who want to rent out, let's say, a room in their home or their entire home or a cottage to potential guests. And so it creates a marketplace that allows people to efficiently transact and interact by using design, behavioral science, and data analytics to make the experience seamless, engaging, and rewarding. Before I jump in, I'm sure you're all now looking at the dashboard, which is cool. And this is a mock-up, of which we have numerous mock-ups, but I'll walk you through it. Robin, is there anything I should?
I just want to make a comment. I see Keenan Lawrence, who's also from Cape Town, has decided to give us some words on the chat there. What I absolutely love about this platform is the potential for collaboration. And it's interesting that Keenan almost pounced on the opportunity. I mean, besides the water issue or the drought crisis that we have in certain provinces of South Africa, there are other issues, social issues that we're needing to mitigate as citizens. So if you look at a provider like Keenan Lawrence, he does atmospheric water solutions. And I think if we had unbounded thinking and unbounded collaboration through vehicles such as this, we would then see that there are solutions. The marketplace is not a marketplace because we're creating something new. It's a marketplace because we're converging what exists and we're providing solutions. The other thing that I'm absolutely loving is the fact that we're moving from citizen apathy to citizen engagement, active engagement at that. And also we're moving from the abstract dialogue to actual solutions at a household level, which then makes a huge difference at a community level. Now, we've been doing community mapping and asset-based community planning for a long time. And it's always looked at from a community perspective, but we have forgotten that the household forms the cornerstone of that collective community. So I'm getting more and more excited every time I revisit CityZEN and the platform. And also the other thing for me is that it's a tech capability that considers the uniqueness of different families and what they need. Just thinking about it, if one family has a grandmother and 4 grandchildren versus a household that has 2 parents, 3 dogs, and a domestic worker, that data that you put in is going to inform the services that you access and the kind of support that you would leverage from the CityZEN platform. So those are the kind of things that are coming out for me as you go deeper into the layers of what CityZEN offers. So yeah, that's the comment that I wanted to make.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so let's, thank you, and thanks for keeping track of what's going on in the chat. And yeah, I'll get to how what this dashboard doesn't show is the layers behind it. And many people always ask the question, it'll come up, and I might as well answer no and now, which is we haven't built it yet. That's what's going to happen starting next year. But I'll also explain before we're done what our methodology is for building. So let's just walk through this dashboard as an example. And and obviously some of you are looking at this and you might have questions, you might have concerns, and that's great. That's part of the reason that we're having this webinar and going to be having a series of discussions around how this service is going to work, because we want to make sure that it works for the people who are most important, which are citizens. Okay, so here we have a gentleman, Adam Clark. He owns a home in an area of Cape Town called Observatory. You'll see under his name that he has a reputation score. I'll get back to that in a few minutes. He has 3 people who live in his home, and he has 1 employee. And that's something that's so incredibly important in all of this, which is during the water crisis, one of the conversations that was had over and over again, which was necessary, is that there are many people in this city who live under day zero circumstances all the time. In other words, they don't have, running water into their home. They have to go to a communal tap, for example. And so we live in a city with an incredible divide between the haves and the have-nots. And yet there's a linkage, and that linkage is the domestic worker. And so this solution is about how do you make that link something that becomes a real positive in terms of change in society. And so let me walk you through how this works, which is that it says there in the dashboard under his name, 1 employee. So obviously in his profile, he fills in information based on how he's running his home. And again, I'd like you to think about it for a second, running his home as a business. And what I mean by that is, regardless of whether or not he works from home, which these days is now becoming quite common and is its own issue that we can address as well. But the point being that in his home, he's got 3 people. So it's him and let's say his partner, and they have a child. And that child goes to a local school, but is quite young. And so they have a domestic employee who arrives in the morning at a particular time to take care of the child while they're getting ready and going to work. And then maybe the domestic employee takes the child to work. So now let's imagine that the domestic employee is late because there's that particular person takes a certain train line, and that train line is out of service. And for those of you who know the transport system in Cape Town, and especially the trains, you'll know that they've gone from bad to worse. At least they have in my time, because I actually used to take the train. But they at this stage, I would say the experience is horrendous, and that's being kind. And I apologize if there's anyone involved in the train system in Cape Town on this call, but that's how I experience it. So now, let's take a very simple example. If in putting in the information about the employee, you put in the fact that they take this train at this particular time every day, and then the system picks up that that train is not working, the system can then provide an alternative. And I don't know if you understand just quite how profound that is, but what it allows is a few things to happen at the same time. The one is it allows for interaction to take place, a transaction to take place that is automatic. In other words, there's no sudden desperate need to try and find a solution, because the platform allows the marketplace to provide a solution. So in this case, there's an example under service requests. The second one, it says Gracious. Let's say she's the name of the domestic worker. She's the domestic worker. She sent you a request for an Uber. Will you send Gracious an Uber for 25 grand? Accept or decline. And what this allows, what the system allows, is micro payments that are automatic. And so, because like in any other online on-demand platform like an Uber, you've put in all your details in advance, it allows you to then transact automatically. The win for this is that, say Gracious lives in an area where normally she would have to then, if she can't take the train, have to wait for a taxi, but say there's the problem with the trains, and so now there are a lot of people waiting to take a taxi, and that's going to end up with her being late, and then that affects how they run their household. And by the way, this is of course the same, could be exactly the same for any business, if you think about it. The problems in the infrastructure in a society whether it's medical, in terms of medical service, or educational, or, as I'm getting at there, in transport, it has a direct impact on people's lives. And yet we don't always know how to solve it without sort of coming up with things at the last minute. And so this creates a marketplace where suddenly taxi drivers in the area where Gracious lives has an opportunity, for example, to use the platform to put a service together so that they can not only meet the needs of Gracious's employer, Adam Clark, but potentially 5 or 6 or 10 other employers in the same area where he lives, in Observatory, where the domestic worker has to get to. That's just one example. Let me give you another one. And this is critical to all of this, because this is always the number one question, as it should be. Who owns the data? Well, you own the data. It's all your data. But as I like to point out, on-demand service systems can't function unless you share some information. So in other words, Uber and its various competitors, or Airbnb or Amazon or whatever, any of them, they can't help you unless you tell it something. So Uber can't help you get to a place unless you tell it where you want to go. So you have to share some information. The difference is that in this case, you own that data. And so when you're sharing information, it helps service you in a way where you keep that information. Okay, example. As you're filling your profile, it'll say, do you have any employees? Yes, I have one domestic worker and a gardener, let's say. Great. It'll start to coach you through the process of the legal requirements for what that individual needs so that you have the right kind of legal relationship. And by the way, this is a big issue, and I'm sure it's a big issue worldwide, but it's certainly a major issue here. I can't even imagine what the percentage is, but I'm sure it's higher than it should be in terms of the number of people who work as domestic employees who don't have a legally binding contract. By the way, these are also the same people who have a tendency to criticize government for being corrupt, but they themselves aren't doing what they should be doing. And I'm going to address this in a minute, but that's an incredibly important aspect to creating a functional society, is that sense of fairness, that we have to treat each other the way we should be treated. And what I've discovered through my own experience of living here is that quite often domestic workers aren't treated with the same respect and legal status as that same employer would expect from their own employer. Mm. And that's a problem for me. But this is a system that allows you, through behavior change modification and using incentives and other methods, to make it simply easier for people to choose the right thing, to do the right thing. So again, as it'll come up, it'll say, do you have a valid contract? No. Would you like one? Yes. And then what you don't see here, because we haven't designed it yet, but basically what would come up would be a marketplace that would say, well, here are 5 labor consultants who have designed labor contracts, and it's 99 Rand for the year. They will update it and send you updates if there are any changes in the legal requirements. And by the way, in addition, it can be translated into a local native language in case that's needed. It's also not a separate document. It's built right into the system so that when, for example, you've filled in the information, it allows for 2 things to happen. And this is really, for me, one of the main lessons of the importance of bringing, and now going back to the water crisis and the dashboard and the information, the 50 liters a day, the importance of bringing the information you need at the moment you're making a decision. That's so, so, so critical, because I've seen this 1,000 times on Facebook groups, for example, where people are like, wait, what am I supposed to do when I'm figuring out leave for my domestic employee? Well, it would be nice if that system was just available to you and available in a way that it's easy for you to understand and easy for your employee to understand. And then, of course, the second aspect to that is fairness when it comes to wages. So I don't know if anybody on this call is aware, for those of you who are in South Africa, I know of at least 2 websites that provide very well researched living information on what's considered a living wage. And what a living wage is it doesn't look at what people are currently paying for, a certain service, such as a domestic worker, but it actually looks at what their costs are, most likely, depending on where they work, where they live, how many children they have, etc. And it helps you navigate the process of deciding on the correct pay level to pay them at. In addition, so that's what it does. Let me sort of end there. But here's the problem. You might have heard about it on, let's say, a talk radio show, or read about it in the newspaper, or someone told you about it. But at the moment you need it, that you're like, oh yeah, where was that? You don't remember the name of it. You don't know where to look for it. Well, guess what? It's all integrated into the same system. It's not forcing you to pay them a living wage. It's just educating you and informing you at the moment you're making that decision what is considered, let's call it best practice. But in addition, it can also tell you, because it's using data analytics, it can, and it will have access to the other information that people say in your neighborhood are also providing. But again, made anonymous so that you don't know who they are, and done in a way that it's not intrusive. So you yourself are deciding what kind of information you want to share. But as we know, the more information you do share about this type of information, the easier it is to manage your society, your community, your municipality. So what I'm getting at is, it could even list, in your neighborhood, this is the current rate, the average of what people are paying. Oh, and by the way, in addition, they're also covering transport costs, they're covering school fees, whatever it might be. Now you might say, oh, but you don't have to do it. You don't. But if I was the union that was in charge of domestic workers, and this is where we now go to the middle section here where it says incentives over here, I would incentivize people to do this. In other words, what could you do? Well, it could be as simple as a campaign. Once a year, you could have a campaign that is, it's November, it's National Give Your Domestic Worker an Employment Contract and Raise month. And if you do so, we're going to give you or your domestic worker, 20% off of their fees to join the union, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of different options. And the beauty of the system, if I'll put it that way, is that the incentives can come in lots of different forms. And so the ones that you have listed here, for example, is classic ones. Again, in a certain sector of the society, there are a lot of people who don't pay their traffic fines. And there are a lot of people who, aren't, for example, paying a bill via a debit order and that sort of thing. And this is the kind of system where a municipality could very easily provide you with an incentive to do the thing that they need you to get done. And I can go on and on with examples of that. So the incentives and then are an example of the way the loyalty program functions. Okay, so now let's just quickly finish this because I want to leave time for other questions. But very simply put, as I said, the profiling process is one in which you are sharing the information that you want to share. So, it'll say, do you want to connect? Well, let me give you this as the last example, actually. When you're filling in the employment contract for your domestic worker, one of the things that all employees have a right to is annual leave, right, and sick leave. It's an area that is a little bit gray in my experience of how that's treated, but let's just say, it's happening. And so a domestic worker is offered a leave, for a week around, let's call it the holiday season in December. And the way the system works is when you type in to, when the employer or the homeowner types in that they're giving leave in that week, the domestic worker will get a message saying, do you accept this? Okay. Now, in addition, it could also say, if you're not sure, do you need assistance? And lo and behold, we could build very easily a chat function in that connects you to one of the many, many, many legal services, free legal services that exist throughout this country, where literally somebody could be either on standby to assist, or you could use bot technology, for those of you who know what that is, or you could just simply put in lots of different examples of ways of explaining how leave policy works in, again, a native language, or has become one of my favorite, innovations of late, which is putting things into comic book form, comic strip form, to make it easier to understand things. What I'm getting at is we have so many examples of great innovative solutions that exist all over the place that aren't coming to market, that aren't having their level of impact, because we're not able to converge the need that somebody has to the information that they need, and then to the incentives that get them to choose the right thing. So let me just finish by saying, so now you've put in, for example, that Gracious is going to have leave for a week in December. What the system could do is it could say, would you like a temporary employee to take their place during that week? And you could, there'd be a drop-down list, and one of the options would be, yeah, I'd be interested in a quote. So here's where, again, here's where the value is. So for those of you in the Cape Town area or throughout South Africa, you might have heard of a successful startup in business called Sweep South, which I mentioned earlier provides like an Uber-like service for finding a domestic worker, someone to clean your house, but they've expanded into other areas as well. Again, it's the same thing. So now, instead of last minute before your domestic employee is going on leave and you're suddenly like, oh no, what are we going to do this week? We've got guests coming and we actually need someone, or we need someone to take our child to school or look after them, whatever it is. The point is, you suddenly realize you actually need that service. And then you're like, oh yeah, what was the name of that company that somebody told me about? Sure, you can go into a Facebook group and that sort of thing. But how much nicer would it be if it simply is integrated, the marketplace is integrated right into the system, and it says, oh, we see that your domestic worker is going on leave. We have an option for you, which is, how about getting a temporary person? And I'm not going to get into any more detail about that, but that, I hope you understand, the point is, it's about how the information based on your budget and your situation needs to be provided in a way that it then accesses as simply as possible an on-demand service, and that it's all tied up in a nice bow with behavior change, incentivizing people to do the right thing, with a goal towards two things. And this is where I'll finish on how the dashboard works. So in the middle at the bottom, you have the dashboard. Now there it says electricity, water, recycling. But this is completely personalized. You could literally put in, that you want to lose weight. You can put in that your family is saving to go on a vacation. You can put in anything, and the dashboard will, keep you keep giving you the information that you need to know how you're doing. But more importantly than that, what's built into this system is a coaching tool that actually guides you through the process of trying to stay committed to that thing that you're trying to achieve for yourself or your family or your community. And then on the right, we see projects at the top and champions at the bottom. And champions are people in your community who are active and doing good things and making things happen. So they could be a school headmaster, they could be the head of the neighborhood watch, they could be, your older neighbor who just, is a great person and does lots of things to make, your community a better place. When I talk about upgrading democracy, one of the goals is to rebuild democracy from the citizen level up, and to try and find a way to reconnect individuals to the democratic process. It's not just my opinion, but it's certainly a worldwide phenomenon. The government has become its own entity, one that's very difficult to control and to know if it's succeeding. And in many cases, we see around the world where it's not. But in addition, we also have this beast called the political party. And the challenge of the political party is sorry, let me take one step back and say, in terms of government, one of the challenges is once government gets created and starts to employ people and starts to use a budget in a certain way, it's very seldom that you hear of a government that wants to cut its budget. And now, obviously, for those of you on this call who are in government, you'd think, why would I want to cut my budget if I'm not achieving our goals? Well, here's the radical thought, which is, what if you could achieve your goals better by not having a large government, but instead by having a small, highly skilled government that uses a management system such as this and then opens it up to the marketplace to solve problems? What would that look like? And to me, the marketplace has two key players in the marketplace. One is those providing services, a plumber, for example, and those who are champions. The champion is, at the end of the day, you know, the term that's currently used is social entrepreneur, but that's often used to describe someone who's, you know, starting an organization that's, you know, NGO or NPO, that's going to help people. But it doesn't have to be. It could, as I said, just be a neighbor who isn't connected to any organization, but they're a doer and they get things done. And my question is, within the context of an area such as Cape Town, which has a limited tax base, so it has a limited budget, to me, I would recommend that we start to think out of the box, which means, how do you engage citizens more in actually running our day-to-day operations and government less? So that's the role of the champion. And then the projects are the things in your local community that you support. And you can support it in different ways. You can support it in, you know, physical labor. You can support it through donations, that sort of thing. I'm not going to go into any more detail, but I'm gonna make the crazy, they call it a BHAG, right? A big, hairy, audacious goal. For me, the big, hairy, audacious goal would be that Adam Clark funds projects, and that's how in the future he pays his tax. He pays his tax directly into the system by what he funds. And more importantly, when you click on the project, you actually can see its status. Where is the money going and how has it been used? Now, you might think that sounds crazy, but again, technology, blockchain, for those of you who've heard of it, I'm not talking about cryptocurrency and all of that. What I'm talking about is the ability to use data to track how we're spending money and how that money is being used. And if we look at the tracking capabilities that we already know exists, and I'll just again give that quick example of, let's say you order something online from a service provider, and again, yeah. So let's say you're in South Africa and you order it from Takealot. You can track every aspect of that purchase. You can track when you first showed interest. You can track when you purchased it. It'll tell you when it's going to arrive. And then if you end up having a problem and you want to return it, all of that is traceable. All of that technology exists. And we can do the same thing with any aspect of society and these types of issues that we decide we want to engage with and solve. I'm just going to skip through this. Yeah, I'm not going to spend time on this. I want to go to one particular slide. Well, two slides. So here's the first one. So during my time working on the water crisis, and because my role at the time, which was nobody was paying me to do this, it was a chosen role, but I was kind of requested by a number of different individuals and organizations to get involved in trying to build a bridge between the tech and innovation community and regional and municipal government. And we had, as I said, lots of different meetings, workshops, and we were looking at a few different projects they wanted to do. But of course, through the process, because I had that role, I was getting requests literally worldwide of, hey, we've got this awesome product, we've got this awesome service, we've got this information, we've got this campaign, whatever it might be, and we want to help. How can we help? And so I decided, really, as we looked, deeply at this, that it was like this analogy. There's so many innovative products and services that don't get enough attention. They're like a big pile of colorful crayons. CityZEN is the crayon box. And to give this context so that it's all relevant for all of you, think about your phone. Whether it's an Android phone or an Apple phone, it is a box. It's a crayon box. And what it allows you, especially through the App Store, is to select any crayon that you want. But what Apple has done, I'll use Apple as the example, but Google has done the same. They've created a set of standards so that those apps can function in the box. And that, to me, is both the genius of what they've done, but it's also the challenge that we have to try and get society to move in the right direction. Because in my opinion, and I'm not the only one who shares this, we've actually solved many of the problems that actually exist. The problem primarily is our ego. The problem is primarily that it's also fragmented, it's all over the place, and a lot of the people or institutions that we would like to have who we believe have a leadership role, they either don't have the capacity, they don't have the competence, or they don't have the integrity to actually make these changes take place in the way and with the speed that we need them to. But if we look at something like your phone, think about the fact that your phone in the background, without you asking anybody any permission or paying for it, it's being updated continuously. There's a change to the operating system, all of the apps that you're using, whether it's WhatsApp or whatever, they're all being improved in the background. There are coders who are making that happen. And imagine if democracy functioned that way, and that it was, and when I say democracy, I'm not only speaking to us as individuals and our role in democracy, but also in terms of the larger picture of democracy also is very much connected to who has power and the role of money and influence in that. That's a discussion for another time, but you can kind of imagine, sorry, how do I go backwards in this thing? No, I can't go. Where can I go? Oh, I can't go backwards there. Imagine a future where champions who have, let's say, a 4.9 rating, imagine if their vote is worth 4.9 times versus somebody who has a 2.7 rating. We don't have to do it. I'm just saying, why not? Because what I do know as of today is, I jokingly say that the way representative democracy functions, it's a little bit like if you and I, we went out to a restaurant together, and you ordered the fish and I ordered the chicken. And the waiter comes, and the waiter is our representative. So the waiter then goes to the kitchen, and the waiter says, oh, wait a minute, you can't have both fish and chicken. So I'm gonna have to select one for both of you. So you're both gonna have chicken. So now one of us is already annoyed, but we don't even know it yet because the representative is off doing their work, and that's what they've done. They've chosen chicken on our behalf. And now the waiter goes into the kitchen and goes to the kitchen and finds out there is no chicken. There is no fish. There's only beef. And comes back an hour and a half later, because of course it's late and what have you. I mean, I'm not making fun of all of government. There's a lot of there are a lot of individuals and departments and governments all around the world that are doing an amazing job. I'm actually making more fun of how the politics of government works. But imagine an hour and a half later, they show up with 2 plates of beef. How would you feel? And then obviously your question would be, yeah, but how do you manage that for so many people on an individual level? Well, that's what technology allows us to do. It actually allows us to support each individual and to achieve their goals. And so I think I'll end with this slide, which takes a little while to explain. So let me go through it. At the top, it has been shown that societies with high levels of social trust are the most functional. On-demand marketplaces use rating systems to create social trust and improve service delivery. So let me dissect those two lines. So the first line comes from the fact that, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, I used to live in Norway. And for those of you who don't know, Norway, and actually most of the Nordic countries, of which there are 5, they're considered some of the best places to live in the world. And the reason for that, so for example, Norway, I think, I don't know what the current ranking is, but I know Norway always makes it in the top 5 in the UN's happiness rating score, okay? So I'm not gonna get into the history and all of that. The point is, the reason that the Norwegians have been successful and what success looks like is they have high levels of transparency, low levels of unemployment, high levels of literacy, excellent public services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so they asked themselves the question, a couple of years ago, the Nordic Council of Ministers actually commissioned a study. Why are we so successful? What makes us different? And what they discovered is they have the highest levels of social trust in the world. And that social trust is measurable. And then they described the journey that they've been on to build that social trust over many, many generations, right? And that's its own webinar, so we won't go into any great detail about that. But here's something super, super interesting, which is today, when the school day is over, I could order an Uber to go pick up my 2 children at school and deliver them home. In a South African context, and sort of any place in the world, that's crazy to think about, that you would get a stranger to pick up the most precious beings in your life and transport them. Now, I'm not saying I'm necessarily going to do this because they're quite young and that's not the appropriate thing to do because of their age. But of course, once they get older, not only will I do it, they're going to do it themselves. And I do it all the time, not necessarily with Uber, but with their competitors, but that's another discussion as well. But the point is, why? Why does it work? And the reason it works, even though it's a complete stranger, is that stranger has a 4.8 rating and 8,000 trips. So I don't trust them as an individual, but I know they're competent to do the job that I'm asking them. That's a big deal. That's an amazing, amazing fact that we can use data analytics. That's what that is, 4.8 rating and 8,000 trips. Those are numbers based on real information given by the number of trips they've done, obviously, which I refer to as their commitment, and then their competence, which is rated based on the people who've actually used their service. That's social trust for an individual I've never met. Now, I don't necessarily know their political beliefs, their religious beliefs, their cultural background. I can go into, Uber and Airbnb and others. They give you a little bit of background on who these people are. But what Uber has done is created transparency, consistency, accountability, et cetera, et cetera. Is it foolproof? No. But is it much, much better than what it was? Yes. As a matter of fact, I don't know the numbers, but I would argue from a marketplace perspective, not only has that service made it desirable for more people to use taxis, which, by the way, if you were to integrate that with your transport plan, is a wonderful way of getting people out of their cars and creating employment. And I would assume, because I know there are about 15,000 Uber drivers listed just on the Uber app in South Africa, and I'm not getting into the financials of it and the way that the business works. I'm just saying that before Uber, it was unsafe, it was inconsistent, and today, now, you have not only a lot more people using a service, which benefits them, but it's also creating a marketplace opportunity. And that is a massive, massive issue. And so, as you can see in the bottom right with Airbnb, here's the quote from a woman who's a host: "I have learned that people are good. I can trust people." The reality is that she trusts the rating. She trusts the data analytics. And then what that does is it allows us to engage with the person without any of the fear that normally comes up around, do I trust the person? And that changes everything in a society. And that's what the Nordic countries have figured out, that high levels of social trust simply make it easier to do business, makes it easier to trust your neighbor, makes it easier to pay your taxes because you feel like the tax money is being spent well, et cetera. This is not a small deal. This is a big deal. And so what I'm getting at is a platform like CityZEN can accelerate the development of social trust in a society, because it's not possible, because it's just too difficult to try and build what the Nordics have built over generations. In a place like South Africa, it's just never going to happen. But it can start to happen through a rating system such as this. So let me finish by walking you through the 5 icons in the middle and finishing off, and then see if there are any questions. So now, how does Uber work? Well, you make a request. So first you have a profile, and then you have a payment plan, whether it's going to be cash or credit or debit card. Then you make a request, right? So you make a request and you say to Uber, I want to go to this place, and then it gives you an automatic status. You don't have to wait 20 minutes. You don't have to wonder. It tells you right away, there's a driver who's 3 minutes away, okay? Then the next thing it does is it tells you who the driver is. It gives you a name, says the name is, Bobby, and that they've got a 4.8 rating and 8,000 trips. So you can then select accept, right? So now each step of the way that what you're experiencing is an action that's being verified, even the trip itself. So you know where they are, you can see them on the map, you can share that information with someone, which makes it more secure. It lets you know when they've arrived. It tells you you've got a 5-minute waiting time. I mean, it's literally real-time service every step of the way. The moment you step in the car, it then changes on your phone, and it says you're on your way, and it's going to take you 16 minutes to get there. Then, obviously, when you're done, it says, thank you very much. Please give a rating. Then there's a transfer of value, which takes place, which, by the way, if you think of all of the online systems, they're all the same in that you've actually agreed to the price up front, which, again, is one of the many areas of what's referred to in tech development and business development as pain points. You want to remove the pain points. The more pain points you remove, such as haggling over a price, the more pleasant the experience is. And then they request that you give a rating. Once they've gotten a rating, that changes their score, meaning their aggregate rating. And then there's a reaction. And this is really important. What I mean by reaction is, again, I'll use Uber as an example. As far as I understand it, in Cape Town, there's no such thing as an Uber driver under 4.5 rating. They remove them from the system. That's the reaction. Why? Because to keep high levels of trust, you have to have high levels of quality. It's really very simple. If a 3.8 driver shows up on my screen, do I say yes or no? Well, they've removed that choice, which is not the same as, say, Amazon. If you're buying a book and it's got a 3.8 rating, Amazon doesn't care. I mean, it's your choice if you want to buy the book or not. Just because a lot of people didn't like it, but your brother wrote it, you're still going to buy it. And Airbnb is the same. So maybe somebody doesn't have a great rating, but the place you want to stay is located close to the airport, and you just need a place to sleep for the night. What I'm getting at is the different on-demand platforms function in different ways, and this gets back, Robin, to what you were saying, based on your individual need and what you need. So here's what's really cool about these 5 icons, is it works for everybody. In other words, let's take top level CEO of the biggest corporations you can imagine worldwide. What's the request? The request from the shareholders is increase shareholder value, okay? So status on a quarterly basis, there's a report, and that report says, thank you very much, shareholder value has gone up. That action is verified. and here's a transfer. What's the transfer? Here's your stock bonus. Here's your new contract. That's your rating and your score. And the reaction is you get another 2-3 years as the, the corporation chairman. Thank you very much. So here's what's amusing. Now, for those of you who have children, imagine your request is, hey, 10-year-old child, can you go clean your room? Okay, thank you. That's the request. Status, hello, it's an hour later. Did you clean your room? Yeah, I'm just busy with something. It's the same process. Okay. If they haven't done it and you go back, action, verify that it's not done, action, verify that it's not done, if you get annoyed enough, the transfer that occurs is you're going to remove something from their lives, most likely. You're going to say, hey, if you don't do that now, you got to turn the TV off, or you're not going to be allowed to do this in the weekend, or whatever it might be. So there's often a negative consequence. I'm not going to get into the issue of whether or not that's good parenting or not. That's not the point. The point is there's a transfer of, there's a transaction that occurs in that moment when the request isn't fulfilled. It's also a feeling that gets created. And we feel that all the time with government, with politics, and corruption is probably the worst example of it, is we actually don't have any idea what's really going on, but what we've requested is the government fulfill its services, and it's the sense you have is it's not happening. And so that makes it less desirable for you, for example, to pay your taxes. And as we're watching in a South African context, we're also seeing as more people are emigrating, as they're starting to feel like the request that they have is society has to function, and they feel like things aren't really working so well. And so their transfer is they physically are removing themselves. Now let's look at the positive version. Now imagine the 16-year-old child, you make the request, clean your room, and like before you know it, it's done. And then you're like, oh, that's great, thanks. Would you mind, helping with the dishes? Oh, and it's done. The more they fulfill your requests, and the more they're able to do it, and almost like in hospitality, they do it without you even having to ask, what's the transfer? Well, one is it could be their pocket money for the weekend, but more importantly, it's freedom. The more you trust somebody, the more freedom you give. The less you trust, the less freedom you give. And the impact that that has on society and us as individuals and as communities is massive. So if we can have a system that helps us develop more trust so that we can all have more freedom, we're going to all end up with a reaction that is a much, much better place. So to close, CityZEN is based on the same thinking that underpins the Uber, Airbnb, and Amazon on-demand marketplaces. But as opposed to those corporate consumer services, CityZEN is specifically designed to help individuals achieve their personal goals, improve municipal service delivery, and increase social trust in the communities where they live. Okay. We're almost out of time.
Yes.
So, I mean, I could go on. So,
Thank you so much for such a detailed overview, George. We have a question, and I think it's going to be a question that arises a lot as the conversation unfolds. We've got Soda Asmal, who's asking, and first of all, the comment is really great idea, and it's coming from a good place. The only concern would be the privacy of the data and willingness of families to share what could be very intimate information. You did touch on the ownership of data, but I think just drive it home so that participants actually feel a little bit more secure that your business is not going to be all over for anybody else just to be privy of.
Yeah. So there are two things I'll say. So the one is, and I'll say it again, you own your data. And what's interesting is, remember, I mean, again, I'm back to the crayons thing, and you have to realize I've spent a lot of time in the tech innovation space. There's a massive movement worldwide around personal sovereignty around your data. And we're gonna see a change. Matter of fact, I think that's gonna become the next major human rights issue. I mean, it already is in many ways. And so the answer to the question is, of course, we're going to use what I'll refer to simply as best practice in terms of you own your data. but you share it in a way that the system responds to you, but then you set your preferences. I mean, in a way, it's a little bit like Facebook and any other. You kind of imagine concentric circles and who you'd be willing to share what kind of information with. So you can, and by the way, there are, again, I can name you 3 data analytics companies just in Cape Town who have already developed the technology that takes information and shares it from like a bank to another potential consumer service, and that data is completely anonymous. There is no way of knowing who that person is, but the data gets shared. So again, that's the whole point here. And getting to the second point, which is in, it depends on how you signed up for this, but in the Urban Festival program, it lists about the cooperative. One of the things that we were going to talk about was the cooperative nature of the business model. And what we haven't gone into is the fact that this entire platform will be owned by the people who use it. So that's its own major discussion, but that's my answer to your question. Best practice in terms of personal sovereignty, in terms of your own data, you set the preferences for how you want to use it in terms of, think of concentric circles, but at the end of the day, this is not some large corporate. I mean, it will be because its potential is massive, but it's going to be run and owned in a very different way. Okay, we've got 1 minute left. Robin?
We have another question from Sophia, but
yeah,
I think before we go, I think before we go to Sophia's question, I would like to kind of paint the picture in my own head. So we've got Robin, who is a professional, and when she is a professional, she loads up her family profile, and a year down the line, suddenly Robin loses her job.
Mm-hmm.
So the circumstance now changes, but it's the same person. And a lot of the time when I do a social facilitation, I often say unemployed doesn't mean insignificant. Does the platform speak to the talent, the talent of the person using the system? So for example, I might not be generating an income through my services that I'm rendering, but I can get up in the morning and do something in the meantime that uplifts my community using my skill set and my talent base to make my community better, also to change my mental state, because again, unemployed does not mean insignificant, and we're trying to drive that point across at a community level. Does this solution help with that type of conversation as well?
Fantastic question. And I mean, I'll be as provocative as to say that in this day and age, it almost feels like being employed is what makes you insignificant, especially during the gig economy. So yeah, that was another big part of this, which again, I mean, we're going to go a few minutes over. For those of you who need to leave, please, feel free. But for those of you who want to stay a few more minutes, I just want to answer these last questions because they're all, of course, great questions. So here's what I haven't done is I haven't gone through how this 5 step icon system works as a citizen. So let's make it really simple. Walking down the street and I see a leak, right? So that's not me being a good Samaritan. If I'm a taxpayer in a neighborhood, that's me making a service request, right? So my request to the city is come and fix this thing. Now, none of the current operations function this way, although I do have to say, again, we have GovChat, which is a new platform that's doing a wonderful job of starting to fill this gap that allows you to do this. And that's the kind of system we would integrate into what we're doing. But let's just keep it simple and say you make a request. Let's say you send it through a WhatsApp line and it gives you status. In the perfect world, the status would be like Uber. It'll say, someone will come, a plumber will come or be on site, or someone will come and be on site in the next 2 to 3 hours. Okay, let's just accept that that's got to be good enough for a municipality when it's trying to, deal with lots of different things. And then there's an action, right? So in 2 to 3 hours, you will get a message saying someone is now on site, which is mind-boggling compared to what you currently get, right? Why?
Yeah.
Because as a citizen, maybe it's outside on my street. Maybe I'm going to go there. Maybe I'm going to physically go and see what's going on, which, by the way, is a great way to also help citizen engagement. But let's not go into too much detail there. And then it's verified, meaning at some point it gets fixed. So what happens next? Well, imagine it says, "Thank you very much for reporting this. It's now been fixed. Here's 50 loyalty points in your account." And you can use those loyalty points for something that a municipality would care about. It's not a coffee at a chain of coffee shops. It's, you can use those 50 points for health, education, recreation, arts, and culture. Now grow that. Grow that to a request to the public. Hello, public, we have an issue. I mean, I can give you lots of examples. This happens all the time where, I know in a certain neighborhood in Cape Town, a child went missing. So a request goes out on Facebook, come and help us find that child. It all changes once that all becomes centralized in terms of the information, because it's just easier to manage. And again, this is the tricky part. And this is, in my opinion, the biggest challenge with the future of democracy is we need to hyper-personalize and yet also make sure the collective is taken care of. And and behavioral economics, there's lots of proven, I'm not going to call it theory, there's proven methodologies on how to do this on the hyper-personal side to the collective side. So I just wanted to give that as an example. Why do I mention it? I'm sorry, in response to the question, a city could put out, "Hey, we need our streets cleaned." And guess what? You can suddenly just, decentralize cleaning up of streets and then offer people points in a system and potentially cash, depending on how the system works. And we already have lots of examples of that. So again, the point here is, in my opinion, in a modern democracy, a municipality is a very dynamic relationship between its government and its citizens. And this is a platform that makes that much easier to manage.
Thank you for that, George. We've got Sophia's question is, what challenges have you encountered in conceptualizing the CityZEN dashboard? And have you been able to engage citizens and officials with the dashboard simulation, and what have their responses been?
Yeah, so the challenges with conceptualizing it has, so it took a while to crack the code, and to be honest, in my opinion, those 5 steps, those 5 icons, that's really the code. And what I mean by that is really life gets broken down, again, going back to my very first introduction for those of you who are here, as a social anthropologist, I look at patterns. And what's the main pattern? The pattern is, for any of us, we have a budget. That budget is time, it's money, it's, those are the 2 big ones. But those budgets are also, it's food, it's whatever we're using, and then there's parameters that affect our decision making. Obviously ridiculous simple ones, but I'm a family and I've got 1 child, and then we have a 2nd child. Well, my budget is the same, my parameters have changed. I now need to redistribute, how I'm using my money, how I'm using my time, etc. It seems it's very simple, really, if you think about it. And then the question is, okay, now I need to change my behavior. What do I do? In order to change my behavior, as we all know, when we've tried to change our behavior, for those of you who've tried to get physically fit, or, change your eating habits, or cut down on your water usage, whatever it might be, or let's take social media, that's a good one, on a regular basis, most people are saying, oh, I should really be less on social media. Are you able to do it? we need incentives and we need support in order to do that. And the knowledge and the technology to pull that off. By the way, I'll just mention this. One of the great inspirations for this entire platform, there are a number of different companies. One is GCX, which provides a dashboard for facilities managers. The V&A Waterfront uses them, absolutely brilliant. That's more on the natural resource side. But then you have, and they're based in Westlake, here in Cape Town. Then you have Cognition, based in Salt River, but with a global presence, that provides an online platform for coaching. For those of you who know what coaching is, it's like to help you achieve the goals you're trying to achieve. It's such an incredible platform that it's used by Accenture, the largest consulting company in the world, to help their employees change their behavior. They go down to the personal level of sometimes the behavior change is related to what the business wants them to learn and achieve. And it's also able for them to set their own goals for themselves. Again, might be health related, those types of things. So the point being, in order to conceptualize this, there was a lot of work that went into it. And it was a few light bulb moments that were key. And now that we've conceptualized it, what the last 2 years or year and a half has been about is testing it, testing the concept, having conversations, but also looking at other sectors in which it could be used. All of that has been, we've got incredibly positive response and have had, again, lots of people involved in that process. I've only had a few instances where I've actually presented this to government, to people in government. The responses have gone from disinterest to interest but fear, where actually the response was like, no, we don't want something like that. And then the most positive responses have come from two types of people within government: those who are either innovative and they see that we need to create a new type of platform to make it easier to manage society. And then the other side is a conversation I had with someone who works with the Auditor General at a very high level in South Africa, who knows because every year they do the analysis. And that analysis every year tells you that municipalities aren't functioning. And every year, that's the limit of what they can do, is just to tell us it's not functioning. But they don't have any way to change the behavior. And so CityZEN allows us to take their knowledge and meet it with a way to change behavior. So the answer to the question is, we haven't fully engaged with government yet. And then the last part of that answer is, we can build it anyway. And the reason we can build it anyway is because the system itself isn't dependent on government at all. Because the marketplace can function quite fine without government being involved. You know, it's just a citizen engagement household management tool with a marketplace connected to it. You know, it's at the end of the day, it's actually not it's not reliant on anybody saying yes. It's reliant it's reliant on the customer saying yes. And the responses we received from, you know, a certain group of people is yes, they would use this for their own home.
Okay. So the next question, because we're seriously out of time now, I'm going to merge the first part of Patrick's question to a question we got from an anonymous attendee. And the question is, how are we going to address the tech barrier that low-income households experience to access CityZEN? So that is the question that remains unanswered, because the next part of it was, have you pitched this to government? On the anonymous side, and I think maybe you answer that one, because I am passionate enough to answer the anonymous attendee's question, because that focuses on if most South Africans are living at level 1 or 2 on Maslow's hierarchy, this platform seems to be more viable for the relative few living at level 4 or 5. How do we seek to mitigate that disparity? And before you go to Patrick, I'd like to say to Anonymous, in the really traveling the gravel in terms of social facilitation and community development work. The one thing that hit me like a ton of bricks one day, when I was doing a review for government on certain projects that were being funded by the Jobs Fund, we went to visit an SMME project in rural KZN, Northern Natal, and we were sitting in a hut. That was the boardroom. The boardroom table was non-existent. It was ladies on reed mats, and they had a sustainable solution for income generation for the women in their community. So while we look from an academic eye as to how South Africans are living, I think every citizen and every household is ready and waiting to reclaim their responsibility and their role in our democracy. And it's just the mechanics or the tech that needs to be bridged. But in terms of the solution and the motivation for the solution, it needs to be everywhere, from Lusigisigi, which is the former Transkei, to Sandton. We need to really be more proactive as citizens, regardless of our income level or our education levels, as it were. Yes.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with what you just said. I mean, yeah, and a matter of fact, I would argue that government is a problem in that there's an expectation that government's going to solve all sorts of problems.
Yes.
It's just not going to ever solve. So, and so you need to encourage people to be more active. And so
yes,
the platform can allow that to happen. Again, keep in mind, everybody who's watching, that you've only seen one variation on the dashboard. And for those of you who are familiar with technology and you think about something like a platform like WordPress, which is basically a content management system for running a website. WordPress is the basic foundation, but then you have all these templates and plugins. So this is less about I've solved every problem or we've solved every problem, and it's more about we're just aggregating and converging technology, social innovation, and behavioral change into one platform that's simply going to allow us to move in the right direction. Okay, so in other words, if I start very simply, as I used the example before, an Uber driver starts off at 0 rating, 0 trips. They have to build up their social capital, right? And in order to do that, they have to keep trying and succeeding at being good at something. Airbnb is the same way. You have people running Airbnbs all over the world who've never been trained in hospitality, but they're obviously naturally good at it. And this is kind of my point, which is we have people who are naturally good at getting things done in society, and they're not part of government. And we've this weird dynamic that's a split between these worlds, and that split has to be removed if we're going to actually solve the problem. Okay, but that's the tech barrier. There are a number of answers to it. The one of the obvious ones is, in a loyalty program, you'll earn points. You can use those points to pay for your data. So to me, that's a really simple one. If you don't have cash as an option, then you can earn points. How do you earn points? There are lots of ways that a society or community can decide that it wants to give points and access to those points. That's itself, again, that's its own large discussion. That's one side of the equation. Then there's another middle part of the equation, which is technology, which is, it's not difficult at all to create a system where someone is looking at a dashboard on their MacBook, like I'm doing, and therefore I have the latest technology and fiber, and I can afford all that, etc. But you can then flip it around, and the person at the other end of the spectrum who only has a feature phone, as it's called, doesn't even have a smartphone, they can still interact with the system. They're just going to experience it at the low tech variation. That's what inclusive design is. So it's not perfect, but it's the starting point, is that there's a connection between the two. The win is also looking, one of the things I like to point out is in terms of my work as a social anthropologist, if you want to change society, what you're aiming for is to get your middle class to act in the right way. And then if they start to act in the right way, you're going to increase the wealth at the bottom of the pyramid. That's its own discussion. That's a whole economic discussion. But I just want to point out two things about that. The one is there's lots of, most of you probably know this. If you're in South Africa, maybe you've heard of it, but I did some work with a company that's now created a competitive product to WhatsApp. It's called Moya Messenger. It only works on Android currently, but they have something, I don't know where they are these days, but they're somewhere between 3 and 4, maybe even more million daily users, because it's data free. So it allows you to send messaging free of charge in a platform that's as good as WhatsApp. And that technology exists. And again, it's a crayon. It's a fantastic crayon that most people will never have heard about, because how do you hear about it? Who tells you that it exists? And that's one of, again, I can name 20 solutions where there are really great concepts around rethinking internet access, even access to cell phones, that can work. But again, if you can centralize the access to that information and centralize the rewards program, it makes it much easier to manage people's escalation in their ability to access those types of services, regardless of their income level. That's my starting point response. It's its own conversation.
We've got Lehlonolono. Did I say that completely wrong?
Well, you said
I'll get it right just now. Can this platform get municipalities to conduct campaigns, surveys, and allow citizens to conduct petitions?
Right. I've brought up the screen again. Sorry. So there are a couple things. Notifications and projects are both areas where, during the water crisis, one of the biggest issues was how is the city of Cape Town going to engage with its citizens? And obviously it moved eventually to WhatsApp as a solution. Here, the notifications, here's a very simple one. City of Cape Town, this is a clear notification. There's an electricity outage planned to take place in Polo Road. The beauty of this as an example is I live on Polo Road. If I don't live on Polo Road, I won't even get the notification. So that's a notification, but that same notification can be a survey. It can be a campaign, and that's where the champions and the projects get in. Then the champion says, Jade is involved in the river cleanup in the observatory community. Join to get involved. You click join, and there can easily be a survey, and that survey could be connected to a campaign. And what I haven't, again, what we haven't built out yet in terms of even how it's going to work. But the more you click, the more information you're going to get. But again, it's all centralized. There's some amazing campaign technologies, petition technologies out there. Both international and local, but they're crayons. And you have to go find them, and you have to go onto that platform separately. It takes time, it takes effort, and then you also don't even know what the result is. Yes, maybe you'll get an email notification, but just think about how much easier it is to be politically aware, politically active, community engaged, if it's all in one centralized location.
Okay. Last comment from June. Thank you so much for that comment. This is a good tool for transparency and accountability, but there are communities who are still off the grid, not by choice, but more an issue of infrastructure. Maybe a private-public partnership can work for us. It's not really a question, but just a thought on how a country like ours can access this kind of technology. 100% agree with you, June. Those communities, I think before we even get to the tech, it's going to those off the grid communities and doing live activations or participatory facilitation around getting them on board CityZEN, because we know that there are those, the digital divide is very real, and definitely this type of conversation has its place. So thank you for that.
Yeah, great question. And again, something that we can explore. The whole point is it just makes it easier for those who are already working on those types of challenges and then looking at innovative solutions to have a marketplace. And that marketplace goes both ways. And that's my last comment about all of this. A marketplace is not just about the market in terms of consumer products and services. The marketplace is also citizens. Accessing citizens and getting them to behave in the right way in terms of getting engaged and understanding really what the issues are in the simplest of ways, not some political debate that ends up with you actually have no idea what's left from right, is meaningless. We need people to act. So I'm done. Sorry it went so far over, and we need to finish like now because there's another group using the same Zoom account. So Sophia, apologies. Let's get done. So Robin, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I apologize about the video.
Thank you.
No
problem. Thanks.
And thank you for everyone who's been with us the whole time. And we have your email addresses and we'll be in touch to tell you about what's coming next.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.